In this episode, I sit down with Dylan Menges, the founder and designer of Menges Design, about the exploration of creativity and how his clients benefit from that. So, Dylan is one of the best creative minds that I know. He enters every project with this amazing ability to be able to completely clean the slate and not be caught up in a single style to solve a client's problem. He's less obsessed with the tools or trends that exist and much more obsessed with getting people just to stop in their busy, technology-filled lives and feel something. So, let's go to Columbus College of Art and Design, where I meet with Dylan. All right, so to get started, can you give us an intro of yourself and kind of how you help people create business?
I am Dylan Menges, and I own a small studio called Menges Design here in Columbus, Ohio. And in terms of how I create business for people, I bring a couple things to them. The first is expertise, which is, I hope, true of anybody that hires a designer like me. And I've got about 20 years of experience in brand design and graphic design, a few other things related to that. The thing that I bring to clients in terms of creating business that's unique to Menges Design is I bring efficiency, which is part of why I started Menges Design. And that doesn't sound like the most exciting thing, but I found after 20 years in the business, or almost 20 years in the business, there's a real opportunity there to bring efficiency to a client of any size.
Yeah.
Because what I saw was agencies of a certain size make money on inefficiency. It's just a model, and we don't like to talk about that, but I'm talking about it to say that I just found that as I looked towards the long-term path of my career, what I wanted to do, I realized that small would be good. So that efficiency creates value for clients in that I don't have overhead like a lot of agencies. I have an agency of 2, and then I have an agency of how many I need to get a particular project done. So those are 1099 employees. Again, I don't have that overhead. I don't have a lot of extra costs. I don't charge clients for a lot of things that a typical agency would charge them for, including process. So there's a lot of, I can really expand on that to a longer answer, but the shortest answer is that efficiency, again, hopefully creates a value for clients in terms of what we can turn around quickly and what we can eliminate in terms of process to get a certain thing done.
Yeah. If I was to say you have a one or two word title, what would it be?
Design guy.
Design guy.
Yeah.
If just one, then it's guy.
Guy. Yeah. Art boy. Compound word. Again, I just don't get too caught up in titles the longer I do this.
Yeah.
I'm a guy who makes design.
Yeah.
I've got an art and design background. It just gets really complicated the more you talk about it,
Yeah.
I'm an art guy, art boy.
So can you talk about some of the clients that you work with and maybe why they come to you, or why at a certain moment they come to you?
Yeah, one of the things I look for in clients, one of the primary things is I look for a single stakeholder relationship. And in the last couple years, when I look across all of those clients, and it's a range, I've got small mom and pop shop stuff to some of the bigger clients. When you look at that range, I think what's unique and interesting is that in every one of those relationships, I've always maintained a single stakeholder relationship. And what's really important about that, and I know I'm going to name drop on you, but it's important to answer the question.
Yeah.
When I think about the work for Sherwin-Williams, Siemens, AEP, the Resource Samarati, now IBMX relationship, and I'm going to forget a few, but in all those big name situations, even the Subaru work that we retouched a couple years ago when I first launched Menges Design, in all those relationships, that was a single stakeholder in play. And I just know from experience that even if you add a second stakeholder, it causes complications.
Yeah.
There's just dynamics there that make things a little more complicated. So that's the first thing I look for. The second thing I look for is someone who values design. And that doesn't mean that they're just a luxury brand kind of a consumer as a person or their business. But that's also a long answer, but that we could, don't have time to explore. But it happens in conversations where I find out how they value design. So, to put it one way, I can often tell within usually a conversation, maybe two, where this is going to go, and if I want to pursue that relationship. Again, just by asking about things like brands that they love and why they love those brands. And again, it doesn't have to be a luxury, doesn't have to be a list of luxury brands. I just can sense by a lot of details and some very direct questions that can help me understand, will this person value this work for the long haul?
Yeah, that's good. So can you say, is there something specific that happens to why they kind of reach out to you? Is there something that happens, or are they kind of working on something specific? Is that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what I know so far, because I don't often ask directly, how did you find out about me?
Yeah.
What got you to this phone call or this email or whatever? What I have heard consistently is that people see the work that I've shown on the web or on Instagram. So I've gotten work directly from both of those multiple times over the last couple of years. And it's literally just that. Hey, I saw this thing you posted. Here's an example. I posted a piece of lettering that was just a Foo Fighters lyric, just because I liked the song. And I was just messing around with some lettering. It was not a commercial job for an actual client. But I posted it because I thought that's a good representation of a style of lettering that I like to play around with. Mm-hmm. And it might have value for somebody else. Well, sure enough, a guy called me and he said, I love that. And I'm starting a restaurant that's based on, what's the band? Allman Brothers. It's got some Allman Brothers related musical stuff swirling around the theme here. Would you be interested in doing some work for us, some interior design? Sure. So just one little graphic that I kicked out in about a half an hour led to a really nice job with a great client and a single stakeholder, by the way.
Yeah.
So the lesson for me, and I think for a lot of people that I talk to is, and I say this over and over, but it's remarkable how little I see it, is you've got to show the work that you want to get hired to do.
Yeah.
And yet I know people out there that call themselves creatives that, one, either have a website that is so horribly outdated on some blogger platform 10 years ago
yeah.
with no creative work in it, or they have a splash page. And I know a couple people in particular, and of course I would never name names, but I know one person in particular who's upset about their current client base, and they'd love to fire a couple of these clients, and yet that person has a splash page.
Yeah.
Well, how do you expect to solve that problem and gather new work? So again, I don't want to trash my colleagues, but that's what I see out there, yeah. And to me it's a warning sign, and it's a call to action for me on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to keep my website tuned up, which is always a challenge, right? I'm not going to pretend it's an easy thing to do, but I find that's a critical thing in order for me to get new work, is just keep putting that work out there, because that's what I'm hearing is, yeah. I like this, can you do this for us or something like this? Yes.
It seems like you are a really good example of somebody that you try to put out content, right? You try to put out those things that you said, that stuff that interests you, stuff that you make, stuff that most people wouldn't put out in the world. And I don't think that it has anything to do with quality. I think that people see it as, whenever they have that splash page, they're so overwhelmed of like, well, anything that goes on there has to be like the most perfect thing ever. Yeah. And then you have people like you that maybe you spend like 20 minutes to an hour like working on some of the stuff, and you just post it and then you're on to the next thing. I think it says a lot more about you, the fact that you do get that kind of stuff out there. And it's really interesting to hear how it kind of helps you create relationships. Whereas these other people with just splash pages, nobody knows what they're gonna get from them. People probably go to these people with splash pages because they're listed as doing a certain service, but everybody does a certain service a different way, and I think that if you just have a splash page, I think that there's just a real failure to kind of communicate values, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. again, I know I'm going to come off like a jerk because I'm being
Do it.
critical, but I just, my hope is that those guys that I know and gals that are in that position, I truly hope that they can make the time to fix it, because there's just no moving forward without that presence in some way, in some channel. And let's face it, that's the channel. It's 2017 for crying out loud. It needs to be done.
For sure.
And again, I say that knowing that I have to tune my website. I just hired a writer, a guy that I just did a project with for the Columbus Convention Center this summer, and I hired a writer to help me because I can't do this on my own. And that may be the struggle for some people too. Is we all know doing your own branding sucks.
Yeah.
That's one of the It's one of the hardest things in the world, and you fine tune it to death.
Yeah.
To the point of what's the phrase?
Beat a dead horse.
That, and there's probably 6 phrases, but yeah, it's painful to do your own stuff. So I've realized again, just in the last couple of years, I need to reach out to people and say, help me here. I like to pretend that I'm a writer at times, but the real answer is I'm not nearly as good as some of the fantastic people that I can bring in and pay them well. I hope they feel like they're being paid well to do this and help me.
And that's a pretty similar way that I kind of run my business, where it's stay small and grow kind of as you need for certain projects. It's the focus for me is always, how do you solve the client's problem, or how do you help them reach their goal? Certainly they come to you expecting one thing, but if you can be like, hey, listen, if we had a writer on this, if we had other people doing things here, like this could be more effective for you.
Right.
I think that's an interesting thing.
So to that point, I mean, we're sharing the same model there, and in that experience for a client, they're coming to us for help, and it's just often part of the equation is to say, this is the best recommendation I have, and that recommendation includes, again, saying what you're saying, we need to add this person and that person in order to bring these components to the right place.
Yeah.
Does that sound reasonable to you? And here's the price for it's an easy conversation to have, especially like I said earlier, when you can show them the value of that relationship, knowing that you're not bringing this person on as a full-time person. I think of it as, and this is I think where you and I are very similar. We provide more of a SEAL team operation versus a platoon, and it doesn't mean that one's wrong or one's right. In a lot of scenarios, I know that clients that I have for certain things, they need a platoon of people to handle that, and I may not be the guy, because I certainly don't have a platoon immediately available, and I'm not sure I want to gather or take on a project that requires the platoon. But if it's more SEAL team based kind of a thing, to put the former military, it's going to happen. It's going to be analogies. But if that's the model that best serves them, that's me. That's Menges Design.
Yeah, for me, it's those platoons. Those ones out there. I feel like they almost have to say yes to too many things. Whereas speaking, I guess, from a little bit of experience here, where it's, working in some of those companies, you can't always afford to say no whenever you don't think that what you're doing is the absolute best thing for the client. And that's kind of one of the big reasons that I wanted out, where it's like, okay, I would rather stay small and be able to be honest and have just be able to give my legitimate, honest opinion about things, rather than just being like, you sound like you have some money. Let's go ahead and do that,
And in a lot of scenarios where you have a larger scale environment, medium to large scale agencies, in fact, I heard a guy say this years ago, and I will not name names or agency names, but in that place, which was a great experience for me in total, it was wonderful, worked with all kinds of great internal and external folks. But he said, to quote him, "We can't fart around here for under $100,000. And that's a crass way to put it, but there's a lot of truth in what he said, because I realized as soon as he said it, and knowing some of the scope around a lot of those projects, I realized he's right.
Yeah.
And that was actually one of the first moments where I realized how scale at that level was not something I wanted to be involved with long term.
That's so whenever I was in Los Angeles, a big thing that I started noticing was big companies starting to shut down. And I was like thinking about it first. I'm like, there has to be something going on, a reason that like these big companies just aren't able to do it. And it's like, the problem was that people were driving the prices down and down too much. And if that's where the market is, that's where the market is. But big companies can't survive if the market is down here. So they had to essentially close their doors. And there's a bunch of like smaller companies there that are doing really well, that are between like 10 and 40 employees big, rather than like 1,000.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a big lesson for me while I was there, a big thing that I kind of picked up on. But,
would you ever think about going back to LA?
No, not
No.
to. I mean, it's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
To work. One of the big things is a big personality difference. It's sort of like a weird like high school relationship where you're in love like immediately, but then like the longer you're there, you find that you guys just don't have the same personalities. But sometimes you hang on a little bit longer because you're like, I don't really know. Maybe it's not just high school. Maybe it's just maybe it's just all relationships sometimes, or bad relationships, where it's just we couldn't find that common ground between me and the city, basically, where I want to be successful in what I do, obviously, and so does everybody else there. But a lot of people were kind of willing to do it at the expense of somebody, whoever had the checkbook, basically. And I don't know, it just got to, I'm not saying that everybody there is like that, but just some of the situations that I kind of encountered was, I want to be able to put the client first, and I want to be able to do the work that I do and feel good about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
sure.
that was the big thing, where we had several conversations in big meeting rooms, and I would say out loud, hey, that's not going to help them. And then they respond with, that's not our problem. Like, that's not our place to say that. And I'm like, in what world of somebody actually helping a client does somebody ignore that? Yeah, that's my little rant about that. But enough about me. Let's see what you did there. All right, so getting back on track here. Can you describe what your process is like whenever a client walks in? What happens?
The first thing I try to do, and this is always a struggle, is try to remain jargon-free, just be down to earth about it. Because again, I say that having spent a lot of years doing this and learning some hard lessons over time about being caught up in the jargon and trying to sound smarter than I really was and all that crap. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in terms of process, is trying to set and then reset, or not reset, but set and recommunicate expectations. So set expectations up front, and then make sure we're following those expectations. And the reason I have that as part of my process is because I've seen many jobs derail because expectations were never set in the first place, let alone maintained along the road, along the way in a longer term project. So those two things are pretty critical. And I think the third thing is, as far as process, especially going into the actual creative of the process, the most critical thing for me is ensuring that there are ideas behind the design. So let me put that differently. What I see all too often are designers who lay things out to a client, no matter what stage it is, and say, well, here are my concepts. That's the word they use, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, there ain't no concept there. It's really good design, and I mean that. I mean outstanding design that hits on all pistons firing, the rationale's there, the design practice is in place. And it could be even award-winning stuff for all I know, and might be. But there's no idea behind it. And that really bothers me.
Yeah.
So, to be honest, I sometimes execute things for clients. Lettering, for example. They ask for a certain style of something, and there's not necessarily an idea behind that. It's a well-executed piece of lettering that, again, design-wise, is done the way it should be done. The style's right, all those things are in place. There may not be an idea behind that. But when it comes to things like identity design, which is the bread and butter of the business, or some of the interior space things that I've done in the last couple of years, I'm always looking for an idea there, always. The simple reason is not just because I can charge more money for that, but the reality is that work is going to stand the test of time because it has an idea underneath it. And when you think about clients that revisit their brand often, every 4 or 5 years, we want to get a new logo. What I look for in those situations, like if you look at Brand New or some of these sites that track these kind of things, I always look back at that work and think, was there a really strong idea in that initial identity before you went to change it? And I think you can start to find some patterns there where there was not actually a very strong concept built into that identity. It was a great looking mark, but not a strong idea. So that third thing is really the most important part of the process.
Yeah. So how do you go about kind of developing that idea with a client? Like, so that they come in. Well, first of all, question first. How do most people kind of contact you? Do they send you an email or?
Yeah, it's mostly email these days. Yeah, consistently emails. Nobody calls anymore, right?
Yeah.
Anybody calls, you're like, what? What? So.
So then, I mean, without like kind of going too detail, I guess. I'm assuming there's the conversation that happens with the client, and that's where you kind of then start kind of making creative decisions. Can you talk about maybe that conversation?
Yeah, one of the things I do in the initial conversation is I talk about doing an audit for them, especially a new client. And the reason I do that is it gives the potential client the opportunity to do a short-term, lower-cost engagement with that audit, consultation audit. It's kind of a combo of those things. But it allows them to have that short-term, lower-price engagement up front, and I do that for them with no obligation past that audit. So what happens, and I'm going to do one here next week, I'm going to take a look at this guy's existing brand and give him an audit, an overview of that, and I'm going to provide a good, bad, ugly scenario there. And I tell him that up front. I'm going to tell you if there's ugly, I'm going to tell you about ugly. And at the end of that audit, I'm going to provide some guidelines, things that I think I'm going to tell you the good and the bad. I'm going to say this stuff's gold, don't touch it. I think it's in a great spot. Here's some things I think need to be corrected, and here's kind of a tier of, from good to bad, and what needs to be addressed first and last, or not at all. And the reason I say it's no obligation is I mean that. You can take that document that I do make it look pretty because I'm a designer, but you can take that document and you can walk with it. And because if you've got a network of people that can handle that kind of work, favors you need to call in, whatever it is, please, by all means, take the document and run with it. But that helps get people in the door, really. And of course, the hope is they want me to execute some of that work, and that's what usually happens, of course. But if they don't, that's okay too. No harm, no foul. And they hopefully walk away with something of value at the end of that conversation and that exercise.
That's interesting. One of the things that I see that you have been doing a lot, and you just said it, is more kind of installation type work, or kind of writing on the walls.
Writing on walls, dude.
Can you can you talk a little bit why you kind of started going in kind of that direction a little bit?
Man, that's a fun story. Well, I don't know if it's fun, but it's a good story, business-wise. First, I never asked for any of it. In fact, it's been such a blessing the last couple of years. I have not solicited any work. It's been all inbound inquiries, which is such a tremendous blessing to have. So the wall work, the drawing on walls, the vertical stuff, the interior design, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same. That started with Resource Amirati asking me to come in and help with some wayfinding. And I'm not going to go through the whole history of all these wayfinding or all these design jobs, but what I discovered in that project, multi-walled project, has really helped me understand how to approach all the other projects, because it happened in that first one, and it was just a huge gift and a tremendous blessing to have. So in that, again, I was asked to do some wayfinding for them. They had a brand new space, 2 floors, huge space. It looked like Darth Vader's lab, really. It was like the Lord Vader himself was going to come around the corner, with the breath, and the stormtroopers around him, and that's what the space felt like. It was, concrete floors, dark gray walls, and I loved it. But it did need some organic funk in the space. It needed some human stuff in there, something a little more tactile and a little more raw. So the expectation was to, in these particular moments around the halls, around the floors, to assign wayfinding design to each of those spaces, whether it was a name for that space, like the alley, or a number or something like that. That's it. The opportunity came when I asked, can we do something a little more in depth on that particular space? And they said, sure, let's explore it. So I started coming up with some concepts. And that's where the aha moment came, was I realized I've got this opportunity to not just get somebody to a particular place in space, on that floor, but when they get there, we can give them something extra that captures them for just a little extra moment. Just like what you do with animation, right? Those little tiny details that people know they're going to get an animation about a particular subject because you have a title up front, but they're those little things that you throw in there that they go, oh, and it catches them for just that second. That's the fun of the project. Yeah. And I never get to see those moments, but I have seen a couple times, in person, but once I leave that job, my hope is that those continue to happen, in that the person gets to that destination, and of course they get where they need to go because they see it says the alley. But in that particular case, they see this inverted perspective view of the city street that has all these little details that talk about resource and IBMX and details that evoke emotion and recall personal people that are part of that business. So all those things were built into that one illustration. And if that stops that person for just a moment and they go, oh, that's a win. It's a beautiful win, I hope, that makes them pause for just a moment in our crazy time-starved culture. Through all the vertical work that I've done in the last couple of years, the fun of the work has been trying to get people to pause. That's the challenge. And you and I both know how hard that is, to get people to stop for just a moment. So every time I take on one of these interior design jobs, it's not just about doing meeting the expectation of defining that space, however that is defined, but trying to find those ways to capture the attention for just that extra moment. And I'll give you one quick example. I did a wall where the concept was about exploring alphabets. So that was delivered. There was this very expressive lettering, A through Z, drawn on the wall. And then as we started to talk through the concept about what does it mean to celebrate alphabets, we realized there are a lot of alphabets to celebrate. And then as we listed them out and started thinking it through, we realized Braille was one of those alphabets. So now we went from this flat wall experience to, I found these little nubs on Amazon, and I actually glued a custom Braille alphabet across that experience, like built it into the wall and then blind embossed it, just painted over it, and then of course drew all this other stuff around it. So there will be people who will miss that completely, but the hope is that somebody walks past that and sees that little shadow coming off of that bump and realizes, oh, that's Braille, and that's it. That's the moment that you want, that little extra pause in time, and that user delight that they call it, right? That's the hope for those kind of experiences.
I feel like you're an explorer. I
am.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
I feel like that's one of the best words to describe you, because it doesn't seem like you necessarily have a destination. You just want to find things. Can you explain maybe how or why that happens?
Yeah, that's a pretty easy answer, and that's I'm a learner. I always want to be a learner. The day I lose that, I'm out. I'm going to go be a greeter at Walmart and just, that'll be a dark day. I pray it never comes. Yeah. My hope is that I'm always, as you said, an explorer, wanting to learn new stuff. And for that reason, I think it's why I do a lot of different things in the work that I seek and deliver for people. The solutions are different. It's why I travel. It's why one of the reasons I started Menges Design was for the opportunity to have flexibility with my time. And as you and I have talked about before, and you've heard me talk before, there's a tremendous value in getting your butt out of that desk, out of that office, and seeing the world around you and smelling the world around you. The past couple weeks in Israel, I know that everything that I saw there, I could visit online. But you cannot replicate things like Carmel Market and walking through Carmel Market. It's not like West Side Market in Cleveland. It's Carmel Market, and it's unique in its own filthy, fantastic, colorful, vibrant, yelling, noisy, crazy way.
Yeah.
You have to be there to understand that and get that feeling. And from that experience, I draw all this visual information and inspiration from that and bring it home. So how that plays out, I don't know, but that's
We'll
part of
see.
the learning, you know. We'll
Yeah.
see. Yeah, we'll see.
That's so. I just got back from Italy. I mean, I guess it was a couple months ago
Nice.
now, but it was pretty similar. Where it's like you're looking around at everything and you're just kind of cataloging almost.
Yeah.
And then once you get back, you're just like, okay, like that's a part of me now, and it's going to come out in some way, shape, or form. Like something that I do is going to be different tomorrow, even if it has nothing to do with Rome or Italy. It's not Italian. Like there's going to be some like archway that I want to include, like in an animation, like something like that. You know, it's. I think that's the really cool part about it is, thinking of it a lot more personal than just make something for you real quick kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, Janet and I were in Sardinia for a bicycle tour last year. And same experience, you could see all these things in videos online, but it's a whole different, to bicycle up into this one village that was up this hill and climb up those streets on a bicycle, and just everything from the temperature to the sounds to the people whipping around you and the language, all of that. Sorry, you can't. You got to be there to soak that in and bring it home.
For sure,
it's powerful.
So a couple more questions here. Maybe a tough question again, but why do you? And I think you actually kind of already started answering this. But why do you think that the work you do is so important for businesses?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. The most important way that I think most clients understand very quickly, the reason why it's important to them is because I will always bring an explanation of the rationale and the logic, the design foundation, the foundation of that design. All that stuff is, say it the same way, there's logic, there's rationale, there's even science, there's math that undergirds good design. And so I'm always going to bring that to a client. I'm always going to explain that to a client and explain the idea and what makes that a good idea and then what makes that a good design, all the principles there. That's the base. What makes it even more important, and this is the harder work for all of us, it's why it's hard, is the harder work is finding the emotion that we can pull out of that. So you gird it, you put a foundation there of all those quantifiable things, and then out of that I like to say, we're not doing heart surgery here, but we are darn sure aiming for the heart and the emotive qualities in that work. That's the hard work. So my hope is that the work is important because it's founded properly, but it's more important because it gets to the heart. It speaks to universal truths and universal needs and wants and aches and desires of people, no matter what it is, a product or a service.
Yeah.
And if I can do that, man, I've got a long career ahead.
Yeah. So you kind of already started talking about this also a little bit, but can you explain any kind of specific results, not necessarily numbers, but just kind of more qualifiable things that have probably happened with any of the jobs that you've kind of helped people with?
Yeah, there's try to touch on a few of them quickly. The Subaru app was a nice surprise in that it was a really small team of people. I know you've heard me talk about this before, but small team, single stakeholder, and really no idea how that would turn out. And yet, gosh, 3 years into it, it still gets good reviews on the stores, nice. Android and Apple Store. So that's a nice thing to see. We still know the downloads are consistent. Ryan Scott, who from UBView, who started that whole ball rolling, he's still going out to Subaru sites and doing 360 video and providing content for that. So that's been a really good, positive, ongoing result or good feedback, since we launched that thing and then relaunched it here a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I hear feedback from clients after the job, which I realize there's definitely an effort involved with that. Again, time-starved world, nobody's got time to do these kind of things, it seems, but just to hear a simple email from a client, which I get consistently, hey, really appreciate this, it's just turned out so great, we've heard such great things. I just did a workshop for AEP and Siemens. So Siemens was the client, AEP was their client. Kind of complicated here, but AEP being here in Ohio, Siemens coming out of Florida, that branch. We met together at Columbus Idea Foundry, and I was hired to come in and just do visual note taking. You've probably seen this, like people at South by Southwest, they put these big pieces of paper up, get out the markers, and they're tracking that conversation, they're writing all this stuff down and doing illustrations and lettering. That's what they hired me to do. And I thought, if I'm gonna be here in this space, I'm a photographer too, so why not just, put the Fuji on my hip and I'll shoot when I'm not actually taking notes on a board someplace or whiteboard or paper, I'll shoot. So I did. And the client saw me doing it and said, could you do some video clips too and we'll stitch them together. At that point, this is not where a designer or an agency needs to go, well, we need to stop and talk about the pricing of that and reconstruct. No, of course I'm going to do that. What's the difference? I'm going to hit a video button or hit a still capture, right? So why wouldn't I say yes to that? So of course I said yes. So that's just serving them with as much as I can possibly give them in the time allowed. And believe me, the rate was great. So you bet I'm going to make sure I maximize the value that comes to you at that rate, including taking things like video clips. So all said, when the job was done, I was able to hand them much more than they expected at the end of that job. And I can't wait to do it again for a client, because that's really fun work. It's exhausting, but so what? It's work. That's why it's fun, and it's fun work, So all said, I got really nice feedback about that from not just the client, the single stakeholder again, from Siemens, but from a lot of folks just involuntarily as they were wrapping up the workshop. And that's obviously great to hear. You feel like you're getting the right feedback that says you're doing something right.
Yeah. How do you decide? So you do a lot of different styles. I guess you can kind of, your work has a style, but you use a lot of different mediums for different things. How do you decide what to use in certain scenarios?
Yeah, I cringe when I hear people say, "Man, I know your stuff when I see it," because I think, "Oh, dude, I don't want you to recognize it. I want to be invisible." As a commercial designer, as a graphic designer, I want to get away from stamping things. And I know when it's the illustration stuff or it's my lettering, I get it. I have this kind of weird look, this kind of, I don't know what to call it. Somebody said like Dr. Seuss on acid or something, which is like, I don't know what that means, but
that's fair. It's
kind of like Janet always says, your stuff's kind of dark. I get it. It does kind of lean towards dark and weird. So in that genre, I get that it's recognizable. But when it comes to things like identity design, especially in things like identity design or site design, to me, I have to approach that with what is appropriate for the communication objective, period. And if that means it needs to get super clean and bright and cheerful in terms of the tone, then we need to be there and deliver that. And if it's different than that, then we'll deliver that too. That may mean, and does mean often, I'll bring a different writer into that scenario than I will for this scenario. So it really depends on what, and not even what the client wants, but what the client needs, and more importantly, even than what their customers need in that scenario. So I love having that variety, and I'm so thankful to have that in my work all the time. And I'm thankful to have great people around that I can say, hey, this thing's requiring this, can you help out on this? And they'll, yeah, sure. Versus being kind of a one-trick pony. I know I could probably stay in the illustration lettering game. Like a lot of the stuff that I put on Instagram is just having fun, just exploring some things. A lot of it's client work, but I do a lot of exploration there too.
Yeah.
And that exploration stays in that kind of Dr. Seussy weirdo tone, the bizarro stuff. I know I could probably stay there and make a decent living, but I think I would find it a little boring too to be in that hole all the time.
Yeah.
And there's guys in town and out of town that look at a guy like Andy Miller. Andy is Andy. Andy does Andy so well, and he has a look that is consistent, and that's Andy. And he's obviously doing really well as Andy the illustrator, in that tone and that look and that vibe, and I love it. But I also look at it and think I don't want to be confined to that. I really want a little more flexibility and freedom in the work that I choose to do for clients. So that's why I seek out a lot of identity work, because it really gives me that variety. It gives me that chance to explore, and like you said, the explorer. I love going into these jobs knowing that I can let go of everything I've done before now and potentially do something that's brand new.
Yeah, that's great.
Kind of add to that, the issue is we are solving a design problem. That's it. And to step into a design problem and not feel like you have flexibility and freedom, I would just have a huge problem with that. I want clients to step into that relationship in the same way and realize, on their end, everything they come to the table with up to now, can we truly table that and talk about a solution that may look different than what you've done for the last 20 years or a year or whatever it is. That's what I want from clients, in the same way that I come to this saying, you've seen work that I've done, because those things have all been curtailed to a particular communication objective. What we're going to do for you may not resemble any of these things, because this is unique and special and custom for you.
Yeah. Before you can help a business, what must they have already done?
Swiss bank accounts and what? Oh. I think the main thing I hope from them is kind of what I just mentioned. I want them to come to the discussion, to the relationship, being willing to let go of what they've done in the past and just fresh eyes on this thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty key.
Yeah.
And I also want them to, kind of related to that, just be willing to have a sense of play about what lies ahead.
Yeah.
Because this is fun. Like I said earlier, we're not doing heart surgery, but we're getting to the heart. This is it's not rocket science. This should be fun. This is visual communication, visual and verbal communication. So I love what I do for a living, and I hope that comes through in the relationships that I have with my clients and the work that we produce. So I want them to come to it with that same kind of like my friend Greg says, childlike enthusiasm about what we're about to do.
All right, so last question is, where can people find out more about you?
You could find me on Instagram at Menges Design, Menges Design, Twitter too, or you can go to my website, which is www.menges.design.
Nice, awesome, that's it.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.